And welcome in to another episode of the Fantasy Football Forecast. I am Trevor Scott here with my co-host Matt Giraldi,
What's going on, guys?
and we are pushing into Team 11 of our 32-team fantasy football breakdown. We're very excited here to be pushing through the AFC South and continuing that with the Jacksonville Jaguars.
Yeah, so tough end of the season for the London Jaguars. They lost five of their last six
London
games
Jaguars.
to miss the playoffs. I feel like it's only a matter of time, but who knows? Side note, I've never actually met a Jaguars fan. So if there's any Jaguars fans out there, please comment below because I've never met a real one in the flesh. But looking at their offseason, they lost Calvin Ridley, they lost Zay Jones. They brought in, Gabe Davis, who's kind of that field stretcher. And then on the defensive side of the ball, they signed Eric Armstead, which, that was kind of a tough part of their defense last year. So hopefully you can kind of fill that hole. Looking at the draft, there's really only one name to note, and that was first round wide receiver Brian Thomas Jr. So, he's someone that, you and I have talked extensively about. If you haven't seen our top 10 wide receiver videos, go ahead and check that out. But he's 6'3", huge, runs 4.33 speed. Upside is through the roof with him this year, and obviously we'll touch on him more on the fantasy component. But yeah, we'll see about them heading into this year. Tough into the last season, but flip it to you for the fantasy side.
Yeah, and Brian Thomas has a major opportunity here. We'll just continue to build on that and start with the receivers here. He has a massive opportunity here because Ridley is gone and Kirk was banged up at the end of last year. He's obviously still going to be there, but filling in that number one role, filling in that X role, there's going to be all the opportunity in the world for him to excel here in his first year. So he's currently going 52 in ADP, which seems low to me. I think with Trevor Lawrence, maybe there's some fatigue on him. I personally have never been that big of a Trevor Lawrence fan, especially from fantasy perspective, but he was very productive at the end of last year. And I think that there's a chance here that Brian Thomas Jr. elevates Lawrence's play because of how explosive of an athlete he is. So I know Ridley was supposed to be that guy for them last year. They did only give up a fifth round pick for him, so it wasn't like they gave up a ton of capital to get Ridley. They ended up letting him walk, but I'm extremely excited about Brian Thomas Jr. from a fantasy perspective. You get late in draft, this is the receiver that I'd be wanting to take a chance on that goes later, right? We talked about um, Adonai Mitchell with the Colts, and I was a lot less enthusiastic about picking him. It seems like he's going to be the three. Seems like he's got some work to do to even just get on the field in general. I don't have those concerns with Brian Thomas Jr. He is going to be on the field. I'm going to end up with him in the late rounds, 12, 13, 14, wherever he ends up settling quite a bit, I would guess, because I think that there's massive upside here. And if he is going to be the target leader on this team and he's going to step into that Calvin Ridley role, this is going to be a steal of a pick here. So I'm all in on Brian Thomas Jr. here. I was really hoping the Chargers were going to find a way to trade up and get him, but that obviously didn't end up coming to fruition. And we're all happy about Lad McConkey, but I think Brian Thomas Jr. is in a different stratosphere here in terms of talent. Moving over to somebody I did mention, Christian Kirk, always a very solid option. I feel like he's underdrafted frequently, and then we get into the season, and then it's like, why didn't I draft Christian Kirk in those middle rounds to either be my flex player or fill out my third wide receiver if I have both my running backs and quarterbacks kind of figured out. So I think he's going at wide receiver 30. That's going to put him in the 7th, 8th round, something like that. But that does put him right next to some higher upside players like Zay Flowers, who we talked about earlier in this series. So I think it's going to be more of what you're looking for at this point. Within regular scoring formats, if you only have to play two receivers in a flex, you're going to take a chance on some of these other guys with a lot more upside, like Zay Flowers, for example. But I don't necessarily think once you have to get down to three receivers, once you're possibly starting 35 wide receivers as a league, that Kirk should move up in that case, because I think his floor is good. He's a very consistent player, can really get you, there can really be a solid contributor for your starting lineup. And when that's the expectation of that type of player in that round, I think that it's very important to get players that produce, even if they don't have the upside to have massive weeks. So that's my breakdown on the receivers here. Gabe Davis, I think, is an afterthought. I mean, even in Buffalo, when he was the number 2, he couldn't form any sort of consistent production. Just the ultimate boom bust player. And I think fantasy managers are kind of done at this point. We see through it. Obviously, somebody's going to end up with Gabe Davis on their team, name recognition, high upside, but it's not going to be somebody that's contributing in any sort of meaningful way to a starting lineup, even in a 3 wide receiver flex league. So that's the breakdown of the receivers.
Yeah, I'm with you on Gabe. I feel like everyone's just kind of done with the roller coaster of 15 points, 0 points, 21 points, 2 points. So yeah, and with Kirk, I think that's a really good point in terms of a 3 wide receiver format, because you're going to want to have someone that kind of sets that floor at the position. And then same thing with Brian Thomas Jr. Like, I'm going to be taking him late in a lot of drafts. We know that Lawrence wants to push the ball down the field. We know that they want to throw it deep, and that didn't really work out last year with Calvin Ridley as much. Kind of a different player than kind of what they had him do. So I'm very excited about Brian Thomas. And kind of transitioning over to quarterback, they've got, I think Fantasy Pros has Lawrence at, I want to say 18 actually. And, for that, looking at him going into last year, he was kind of cemented in that, top 8 tier. And, he's had a lot of inconsistent play, a lot of turnovers. How are you kind of viewing him going into this year?
I think he's fine down there, honestly. I know that he turned it on in a big way at the end of the year. He was much better. He scored a lot of points. He was getting his legs going later in the year too, so he was supplementing his scores with rushing. But at 18, I think that's more than fair, honestly. He was so bad at the beginning of the year. It was, even in Superflex, it was borderline like not able to start him. And or looking to your third, if you hit on a third quarterback last year, like he was starting over Trevor Lawrence earlier in the year. If you had like Jordan Love, or you had even obviously Stroud down there too, but even guys that you were looking further past that, it was Brock Purdy could have been your third option. So there was just a lot of players behind him that were significantly behind him that could have ended up being starters early in the year. And that's a terrible situation to be in from a Superflex perspective. You use a third or a fourth round pick in a 10-team Superflex, remember, and then you end up having to start somebody picked in round 10 or round 12. So I don't have any problem with him going 18 now, right? He's going to go in that 7, 8, 8th round range, and he turns into one of those players who could replace a starter if he is playing very well, or is one of those targets that if you decide to wait on quarterback, you target him because he can actually produce as a top 10 quarterback if he is able to get to a consistent level of production. So I don't have any problem with him going at 18 overall. He finished as quarterback 13. So despite that atrocious start, like I said, he got really hot at the end of the year and really showed that upside that he had. I think he was a top 5 quarterback over the last 6 or 7 games of the season. So I'm in on drafting him too. If he falls there, if he's the guy at 18 that's there, I don't have any problem taking him. Now, if he's going to go around Kirk Cousins, he's going to be going around Deshaun Watson, maybe he's going to be going around Aaron Rodgers. There's a lot of good quarterbacks down there. So depending on how you feel about him specifically will probably dictate whether or not you end up taking him, because there are so many similar quarterbacks that do have upside down in that 18, 17, maybe to 21 range. But overall, I won't be taking him 13th like he finished last year. I won't be pushing him up the rankings. It's not somebody that I'm specifically targeting at quarterback. But if the draft falls to me in a certain way where I still need to fill my second quarterback in round 9 of our setup, I could definitely see taking Trevor Lawrence at that point.
And he's very similar to how we talked about with Deshaun Watson, where if you think this high talented upside player is going to have a bounce back year, draft him as your second quarterback in Superflex and kind of plant your flag with that. So that'll be interesting to kind of see where he goes and if that changes at all during the year. But yeah, I tend to agree with your take on that. And then moving over to Travis Etienne, he was someone I was very high on 2 years ago. I drafted him in our home league, and last year kind of going into the draft for whatever reason, the rookie that they brought in, Tank Bigsby, kind of scared me away from him. And lo and behold, Bigsby was awful, and Etienne finished as the number
Didn't get on the
three,
field.
number three
There was
RB.
so much conversation in the
There
preseason too. It
was.
wasn't just you. It was so much Tank Bigsby, Tank Bigsby, Tank Bigsby, and it was like, okay, I guess this guy's going to work at the goal line. Like they're talking about he has good hands. And then it was like 75% snap share for Etienne. It's like, okay, so all of that was fake news because Etienne was just dominating work, dominating snaps, and dominating touches. It was just all the way across the board. So yeah, the Tank Bigsby thing was definitely a strange offseason story that didn't end up developing into anything.
And we might hear it again. I mean, Peterson said he's going to want to limit Etienne's touches a little bit, and
Yeah, whatever. I
maybe
don't believe him
Tank
anymore.
has.
Of
I
course
don't
they want
really
to limit.
believe him. Yeah, I don't.
Of
I'm not
course
going
they
to
want
buy
to limit
into
it,
it
right? I mean, he got
this year.
all of the touches. He got so many snaps. It's like, yeah, I mean, naturally as just a coach, like you don't want your running back to have to take on that workload.
Yeah,
Obviously, he's going to say that. I'm not listening to anything that Peterson says about the work distribution at running back. They're going to use Etienne as much as he can possibly go.
and so I think I'm going to be back on the ETN train this year at RB8. He's maybe not someone I'm going to be as laser focused on like a Derrick Henry, but he's definitely someone that I'll probably have on a few of my teams. So I'm excited for him. What do you think?
I love Etienne this year. This is one of the few running backs in this range at the end of the top 10 that I will actively target. He finished as RB3 last year. He scored so many touchdowns. This offense should be good. And they lost Ridley, who's their number one. As enthusiastic as I am about Brian Thomas Jr. and how I think he can really be a contributor for your team later in the later rounds, I think that this offense might even run through Etienne more, and the passing game specifically might increase volume for Etienne. So I think that there's a chance here that he is able to replicate his top 5 finish. Maybe not in the same way. Maybe he doesn't score so many touchdowns. Maybe it becomes more of a passing game role, which is kind of what I'm thinking with him. But at running back 8, it just feels like he's in this unique spot where you can get him in the 3rd round of a 3 wide receiver super flex league, right? Where in our league it feels like he's probably going to go in round 3. And like last year, I decided to take Derrick Henry in round 3, kind of fell into the middle of that 25, 26 range. And if Etienne is going to go there, I think I'm going to definitely target him and try and get him there if I can. So I really like Etienne. I really like the floor. I really like the weekly upside. Gavin had Etienne on his team as like a 5th round pick and was just sitting there like, this is the greatest thing ever for the first half of the year because he was scoring so frequently. So I really like Etienne. I think he's a heavy target at running back for the value you get and where he's going.
Yeah, no, I agree. And moving over to Evan Engram at tight end, I mean, he finished the year as tight end too, but there's a lot of mouths to feed on the offense, and right now Fantasy Pros has him at number 8. I'd probably have to dig into that a little bit more. I feel like I'd probably be comfortable with that, but what are you thinking with Engram this year?
Yeah, I mean, they have a lot of mouths to feed. Do they? Are you sure? Like, obviously,
They've
they
got,
have a lot of players. It's not
I
like
mean,
Gabe demands a lot of targets. Brian
well,
Thomas
they've got,
Jr., right? He could be good, but isn't necessarily going to be commanding 9 targets like Ridley did. I think that there's a room for improvement in terms of target volume here, and that's coming from somebody who was 4th in the league at all positions in receptions last year, 110 receptions for Engram last year. I'm not sure I understand why he's going 8th. He's going behind Kyle Pitts. Are we still doing that? Like, is that a thing? Right? I mean, you know what I mean? He's going behind Dalton Kincaid. I understand the upside. I understand the 2nd-year breakout potential. I understand that Kincaid might be the number 1 passing option on the offense, but Engram might be as well. So I don't get this one at all. I think Engram should get pushed up in a significant way. I think by the time we're drafting, he's going to be the number 5 tight end being picked. I think he's an excellent target right after that first tier, right? You're the first tier of tight ends, obviously Kelsey, Laporta, McBride, and Andrews, right? So those 4 are kind of locked in. I don't expect that he exceeds the ADP of any of those 4 players, but I do expect that he's going to be the next tight end picked once we get to draft season.
Love it. Any other
Love
thoughts
Engram.
on Jacksonville?
I just think as quick summary again, we've been kind of doing the summaries at the end of this. If you want to listen in at this part. So we got Lawrence, who should be a decent QB2 in one QB leagues. He's irrelevant. And again, another plug for going to a super flex league, especially if you play in a 10-team league. Making players like Trevor Lawrence relevant is very entertaining when you're just watching the games on Sundays. It's a great addition to be able to follow more teams and to care about more quarterbacks, which is the most important position in the league. So if you're not translating that analysis, you're not translating, focusing on that into your drafts, I think you're missing out on a huge opportunity that makes fantasy even that much more fun. And then the wide receivers, right? I think we hit on Kirk and Brian Thomas Jr., both great values currently at 30 and 52. I think this team's going to be throwing quite a bit. I think they should have a solid offense. So getting kind of bargain deals on possible wide receiver ones for their teams at that point in the draft is definitely something you should be looking to take advantage of if you get the right price. And then you got two studs at the other positions at running back and at tight end. Both of those guys are going to be excellent. Both of those guys are guys that you should be targeting in a heavy way. So, and with that, we wrap up the Jaguars analysis